Hello. Today we learned from the Office of National Statistics that there were more than 100,000 coronavirus deaths. To be precise, 103,704 deaths with COVID-19 on the death certificate. In his press conference yesterday, the Health Secretary said that last week there were more than 37,000 cases on average each day. There were nearly 38,000 people in hospital, of which more than 4,000 were on ventilators. On a brighter note, he did say that nearly 80% of the over 80s had been vaccinated. And we know that more than 7 million people have received the vaccine. And it's ramping up in Telford and Wrekin. Yesterday, Telford International Centre opened as a large vaccination centre initially for health and social care staff. And from Thursday, it'll be the turn of eligible members of the wider public. The International Centre will be the biggest single offering in Telford and Wrekin, with the ability to accommodate more than 1,000 vaccinations each day. It follows on from Woodside Pharmacy and Tel Doc in Mallinsley, and there are many more to come, but there are different ways of booking them. I'm Chris Kowalik, and in this latest question and answer session from Telford Wrekin Council, we'll find out what's open, what's going to open, and how and when you can use them, plus any other questions that you want to ask about vaccinations today. Lots of questions have already come in on Facebook, and please continue to fire yours through, and I will put them to our panel, who today are David Evans, the Joint Accountable Officer for Telford and Wrekin and Shropshire's NHS Clinical Commissioning Groups, Liz Noakes, Director of Public Health at Telford and Wrekin Council, and of course, where would we be without Councillor Shaun Davies, the leader of Telford and Wrekin Council. Hello to you all, and first of all, Councillor Davies, the Telford International Centre has started initially, as I said, for health and social care staff. The vaccination is an NHS operation, but Telford and Wrekin Council helped make it happen at the International Centre. How big an operation was it to set up, and how big an operation is it to run?
Well, we've been absolutely delighted to work alongside our NHS partners in ensuring that the Telford International Centre, the largest vaccine centre in the whole of Shropshire, is up and running and working. And we're going to be delighted to see members of our own community going through the doors of the TIC to get their life-saving vaccinations over the coming weeks and months. And it's really important that people do that. We've been working with our NHS partners, whether that be around ICT infrastructure, whether that be catering, cleaning and parking assistance, whether that be coordinating and recruiting volunteers, and in every way that we can help, we will help. And my offer on behalf of the council was very clear very early on. We wanted to ensure that this vaccination programme works. We all need it to work. We all want it to work. We all have an interest in making sure that our friends, our family, our neighbours, our work colleagues get vaccinated. And although we got off to a slow start, as publicised over the weekend, I'm really confident now. I'm really excited about seeing some of the numbers and the data coming through. That means that we are going to start to catch up, and that's what we need to do: catch up with the national average and then surpass the national average, because nothing less than that is good enough in my view for our borough.
David Evans from the Clinical Commissioning Groups at the NHS. Shaun Davies mentioned last week's news coverage about the level of vaccinations. Where are we now? And presumably the coming of the TIC will be a big boost for it.
So coming in the TIC is a big boost, and I would just like to say thank you to Shaun and all of the council team for the support they've given to TIC. I have to say, particularly in managing to get it to open yesterday in the weather conditions that we had over the weekend, because we were a bit concerned about obviously the snow and ice, and all of the council team did a fantastic job to enable to get the car parks clear so we could open yesterday. Yesterday we planned to deliver 720 vaccines at the International Centre. We actually delivered 760, so we were a little bit ahead of the plan, and we were never going to go for 1,000 on the first day, because obviously we were starting later at 11 o'clock was the opening time, and we wanted to make sure we'd got all the processes working. But we are genuinely very grateful for all of the support from Telford and Wrekin Council to do this. If you looked at the overall figures across the whole of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, in total up until last night we had done over 37,000 vaccinations across the core groups that we are looking at the moment. So that's residents in care homes, over 80s and NHS and care staff, and that's as wide a definition in terms of frontline staff. So it's not just NHS staff or not just care staff in terms of care homes or domiciliary care, it also includes things like podiatrists, dentists, community pharmacists, chiropodists, as well as personal carers for those individuals who are funding their personal care out of a budget.
You mentioned care homes, David. How well is that going?
So we did very well, I have to say. I know there was concern being expressed last week and the week before. If we got into all of the care homes in Telford and Wrekin and vaccinated, we did 97% of, or got into 97% of care homes across the whole of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin. The couple that we weren't able to get into was because of incredibly high COVID positive rates, but they are going to be done this week because it will be clear this week. If I looked at it in terms of percentage of residents vaccinated across Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, we were the highest system across the Midlands region. We were at 82.14% was the last data I saw, although I'm sure that will have gone up over the last 24 hours or so as more data was put onto the national system.
So top of the Midlands.
Top of the Midlands.
Let's talk more broadly about vaccinations for the wider public and how that's all going to work. We've mentioned the Telford International Centre, which will start for the wider public from Thursday. They're placing those bookings now. By the way, if you can only make a booking if you receive a letter, but then we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of how all these systems work in just a moment. Woodside Pharmacy has already been running. I've mentioned Teldoc in Ballinsley. Councillor Shaun Davies, you've issued a tweet earlier on today saying that Sturchley Medical Practice will be up and running in the next couple of days, Hollinswood and Priorslee by the weekend, Dawley Medical Practice in the next couple of days, Charlton Medical Practice by the end of the week. And I think we're also aware that there will be something going on in Wellington and also in Newport. Essentially, when it comes to somebody's turn when they're of that age, and therefore it's their turn to get their vaccine, how are they going to find out? We've talked about people getting letters. We've talked about them receiving a notification and then making a booking. But ultimately, how many letters are they going to get? From whom? And sending them where? Because these little systems that I've just listed here, they're all working at the same time, but they're not all the same, are they? So from the layman's point of view, take us through how it works.
It's all systems go here in Telford Wrekin now, which is really, really positive. So by the weekend, there will be a multitude of offers available to our residents. So if you have received your NHS letter, and the NHS letter is being distributed to the different cohorts at different times. So it's perfectly possible that if you're over 70, you may be receiving your NHS letter anytime now, as well as people who are in their 80s and 90s still waiting for their vaccine. So the simple message is this: if you've received an NHS letter, book onto the link that is provided in that letter and choose, if you want to, a local vaccination site. If you want to travel further afield and that's an option available to you, then that's fine, you can do that too. Or you can wait for your GP practice to contact you, normally by text or by phone call, and they'll be doing that in the coming days. And you can go to your local GP offering. Now, different GP practices have different arrangements. So, for example, Teldoc are doing theirs from Ballinsley, and you would travel to Ballinsley. But what's really important, Chris, to say, and I'm seeing this unfortunately, is there are some real sickos out there who are sending out scam emails to pensioners, asking them to book on via an email link. You will not receive a email link notification. You will not be asked over the phone to provide your bank details or pay for the vaccine. It is a free vaccine. You don't have to pay for it. You're not going to be offered any trials to be part of a trial earlier on. All those things are scams, and they are designed to try and get money and data out of you. So if you are subject to one of those, then delete that email and contact the police or us as a local authority, and we can take that further. But the simple message is, if you receive an official NHS letter, book on and book your jab at a local facility that's convenient to you, or wait for your GP practice to ring you or text you and book in from that point on.
So the nub of it is you get a letter and then you have to then go and make the effort to make the appointment. It's not a case of you receive something and then click on this and it magically happens, because clicking on that link is where the trouble then starts.
Yes.
Okay. Just talking about these various GP surgeries. If it's a GP surgery, it's only going to apply to the patients who are registered with a GP. Is that right?
Not necessarily, Chris, because as you know, we've got two vaccines still at the moment. We've got the Pfizer vaccine and we've got the AstraZeneca vaccine. And although we're seeing supplies of AstraZeneca increase, we're still getting more Pfizer vaccine through at the moment. And the challenge around the Pfizer vaccine is you can't move it. So it is possible, which is why Telsdoc, for example, just use Mallinsley, because they're using the Pfizer vaccine, because you can't move it around their individual practices. So each of the PCNs in the district has a hub which will operate the Pfizer vaccine. But each of the individual practices, when they start to vaccinate later this week, will be offering the AstraZeneca vaccine.
So does that possibly mean that if somebody receives, as one person is suggesting, if somebody receives a couple of invitations, one from the national system, one from a GP surgery, does that kind of mean that if one is offering one and one is offering the other, they can possibly have a preference of which one they choose, not necessarily where they choose it, but what they get?
They could make that choice around where they want to go for the vaccination, and it is possible that they would get Pfizer at one site and AstraZeneca at another site. I have to say the indications are there's very little difference in the efficacy across the two vaccines, so I would just urge people to go to whichever one is more convenient and can offer them the vaccine quicker.
We have had some questions now on which vaccine, and fundamentally you don't get the choice of which vaccine, really, do you? If someone is allergic to certain medicines and they're told they can't have the Pfizer one, will the other vaccine be available to them instead, or will they have to wait until the other then does become available?
No, they would be offered the AstraZeneca vaccine. It may be they had to wait slightly longer. However, there's a couple of things I'd like to stress around this. We are committed to delivering vaccine for all of our over 80s population by the end of Sunday night, provided, of course, they haven't got COVID at the moment, because clearly if you have, you can't be vaccinated. But anyone who is not COVID positive, who is over 80, will get the vaccine or will be offered an appointment before the end of Sunday night. We are moving on over the next couple of days to start looking at the next cohorts, which are described as cohorts 3 and 4. Essentially, that's all people over 70 or clinically vulnerable, and those clinically vulnerable groups tended to be the groups that in the first lockdown and indeed in this lockdown are being suggested that they should shield and not go out at all. So those will be the next two cohorts that get done. We are committed to delivering those by the middle of February.
And then beyond that?
Beyond that, we'll start to move on to the next cohorts, and as you know, that the target that the NHS is working to at the moment is to get cohorts 1 to 10 completed by Easter, and we will then move on to the rest of the general public.
And then it looks like the general public will be done by the autumn.
I think in terms of
right?
getting the 2 doses complete, Chris, that's correct. We would certainly aim to be getting the first dose for everybody across the whole of the population sooner than that. But there is that time lag between the first and second dose, of course.
So while we're talking about who gets what when, you won't be surprised to hear that we have had a lot of questions, specific questions asking, when am I going to get it? So let's go through some of these scenarios then. What's the plan for key workers?
So key workers at the moment, unless they fall within the definition of health and care staff, are not within the current cohorts. Now, I would be surprised if over the coming weeks there isn't national policy and guidance coming out on that, but it's not within the gift of the local system to start extending. We've got a very clear target to achieve. We've got very clear cohorts that we have to vaccinate, and we will stick to that until there is a change. But what I would say to all our key workers, who are all incredibly important, is I'd be really surprised if we don't see some announcement around key workers over the next few weeks, because we know how essential they are to all of our services. And as we begin to vaccinate the clinically vulnerable, and that's over 70s plus the groups I've just talked about, I'd be really surprised if we don't see key workers within the next tranche that are announced.
And specifically in the questions that we've been asked, maybe you've already answered them, but I'll just throw these in here. Childcare workers and police, and also people working in the early years setting, in private, voluntary and independent early years setting. Any difference into the answer?
No, and I understand people's anxiety, and I understand why those people want to get vaccinated. As soon as we are able to vaccinate them, we will.
I think
Shaun Davies, sounds like you want to speak.
Well, I think there's a real imperative mission here for the government. As categories 1 and 2 are vaccinated, we do need a national plan for our key workers, and we need that certainty for our key workers. If you're a member of the police service, the army, the fire brigade, teachers, early learning settings, shoppers, people who work in shops, taxi drivers, bus drivers, security guards, all those people are absolutely critical to the national effort around this. And I think we do need to see from government urgently the route plan to address those key worker staff. And as we clear category 1 and category 2, it makes sense for the government to be spelling out very clearly to the rest of us how and when we'll get our vaccinations. And I think that would provide a huge amount of certainty for our people. And equally, in regards to schools and early learning settings, it's critical, isn't it? Because we all want our kids back in school learning and doing their best, and we can't do that until we have our teachers and our early learning practitioners vaccinated. So my call is we've been lobbying on this, as you know, Chris, to government, is to get that mission plan published so that we can get some certainty.
More specific scenarios asked. A counsellor in private practice supporting people with their mental health. So they believe they fall under the category of frontline health and social workers, but they don't work for the NHS. So how do they get picked up under this category, and when would they get vaccinated?
So if they fall within the definition, and I think they probably do. I couldn't categorically say that, but I think they probably do fall within the definition. They should be getting vaccinated by this weekend, end of this weekend. I would say, though, Chris, one of the challenges we've had is that some of these groups, we don't necessarily have a list of who they all are. So if they would like to contact the CCG or the vaccination centre, we will make sure they get added to the list of people that need vaccinating.
A fairly similar scenario, a frontline healthcare worker, but they work for the military. They have had a letter saying that they can get the vaccine along with NHS frontline workers, but can they choose to have that done at the TIC?
Yes.
They can?
Yes.
So booking onto the national system then?
Will come through the national system.
And choosing it there. How do those carers who are paid by direct payments get their vaccination? They don't work for a social care company. How do they get picked up, detected, and can book on?
So again, I know that the database we've currently got has a large number of those types of carers involved who have been paid out of personal budgets. What I'd ask anyone to do who is concerned that we may not have picked them up is to contact us so we can make sure we add them to the register.
And Liz Noakes, Director of Public Health.
Yes, so I am aware that we've contacted, the council have contacted our own providers, including personal assistants, which are paid for carers, to make them be able to book on for immunisations. And we've also set up, as a council, care worker vaccinations at telford.gov.uk. So if you fall into any of the categories of providers that you should have heard from by the council, please contact us and we can sort that out for you.
Somebody has booked a vaccine for Thursday, presumably at the TIC, although they haven't specified. They say they've given their email address for the confirmation, but they've heard nothing yet. What should they expect to get? Or maybe just quickly talk us through the booking process so people know what to do.
So certainly if someone has gone through the booking process and the booking has been accepted, and what I would say is I know from people that have contacted me directly that sometimes people have gone on for a specific time. By the time they've completed the process, that time has gone and they've had to restart. And I'm really sorry, but that's just about volume of numbers we're getting and the availability of slots. So I would ask them to go back and check. They should have had an email confirmation. If they've not had an email confirmation, check the junk box, obviously, just to make sure it hasn't gone in there, but I hope it hasn't. It would strike me that if they haven't had a confirmation, that booking hasn't gone through and they should rebook.
Someone in their 80s had previously been missed off the vulnerable list in error, but the doctor put them back on the list, or put them on the list. The questioner is concerned that they may have missed their letter, possibly for the same reason, for vaccination. What could happen if somebody is missed out for whatever reason?
So I would ask them to check with their GP surgery whether they're going to be vaccinated through the GP surgery. If they're not, then if you'd like to contact the booking centre, we will try and make sure that you do get an appointment.
Couple of questions.
Because they fall. Sorry, Chris. To interrupt. They would get it on the over 80s, not that they're clinically vulnerable at the moment, but the over 80s trumps the clinically vulnerable in that sense. And I don't mean it to be quite as flippant as that may sound, but the categories that we're working through at the moment in terms of priority order were care home residents, then over 80s, then NHS frontline and care staff, and then we're moving on to the over 75s, over 70s and clinically vulnerable. So they should have received notification as they're over 80.
Forgive me, I was interrupting you with the next question, and you mentioned the clinically vulnerable. Rough time scale for them?
Mid-February.
Mid-February. And someone
by mid-February.
By mid-February. And someone with dementia and also their carer. Would the carer get vaccinated at the same time?
It would depend on the specific circumstances around the carer, Chris, to be honest. And if they are a unpaid carer, as lots of family members who look after family members with dementia are, I'm afraid at this moment in time they wouldn't. If they were a personal assistant being paid for out of a personal health budget, then yes, they would.
So if they're paid, then it'll happen together. If they're not, then they won't. Somebody else asked a similar question. The wife of a husband who is in his 70s and is shielding, but she is caring for him, and she was therefore asking, would they get vaccinated at the same time? So the answer to that would be no.
I'm afraid so at the moment, and this is because of the still fairly limited vaccine supply nationally, and that's not a criticism, that's just the reality. I'm sure people will have heard over the past few days that Pfizer in Belgium are re-looking at their production methodology and redesigning the factory. That's led to a drop-off in their ability to produce for a few weeks. Now, we did have a lot of Pfizer in the country anyway, so I know that from an NHS perspective, we don't think that's going to impact particularly on our ability to vaccinate at the moment. But similarly, I'm sure people will have picked up around the AstraZeneca virus in the EU. Now, the good news is, again, AstraZeneca is being produced in this country. We didn't have any problems with the flooding of the D last week because there is a big warehouse in Wrexham, but that wasn't a problem for us last week, although it looked a bit suspect at one point that it might be. But we are expecting vaccine supplies to come through. I'm sure I heard Simon Stevens talking to the Health Select Committee earlier on today about that. It is still challenging, but that's purely because of the logistics around production and ramping up production at the levels that are required. But we don't anticipate the current situation changing in terms of the NHS.
The lady asking the question about her husband in the 70s lives in Newport, and she also asks, have invitations been sent to the over 70s and the extremely vulnerable in Newport yet?
No, there should have been no communication at this stage with clinically vulnerable and over 70s, because we would expecting to start those in the next few days once we've got the over 80s completed. So she will be here shortly.
Just bringing Councillor Shaun Davies. Shaun, I recall seeing a few days ago in response to one of the council's Facebook posts about the TIC, somebody had said, I've just booked on with Audley Court in Newport. Is that coming on? What's the score for Newport there?
Well, I've been working really closely with Councillor Peter Scott, who's one of the councillors for Newport, and he's been really sort of taking the charge on the campaign around vaccinations for the Newport area. And it does seem there is somewhat a lag in terms of the overt communications that are taking place in terms of particular facilities being open and the vaccinations taking place. So I know from speaking to Peter Scott that there has been some vaccinations taking place, he tells me, at that site. I understand as well that they're going to start ramping that right up by Thursday and Friday of this week, which is good news. Listen, I think we can spend a lot of time getting into the small detail of these things, but what's really important is the direction of travel. So if you are over 80 now in Telford Wrekin, just over half of you have been vaccinated, be your first jab. That means there's another 50% to go. What we've heard from Dave Evans today is that those appointments should be offered to the over 80s by the close of play this week and into next week, and that's good. That then means that we can start moving on with our other cohorts. I know from speaking to GPs that they are itching to go. Some GP practices are further ahead than others, so they're itching to go onto their third and fourth cohorts, and obviously the CCG and the National Health System will make a decision on that in due course. But what we need to be focusing on is getting all of our over 80s done, and then we can move forward then into cohorts 3 and 4. And then, as I said earlier, we do need the government to publish the vision and the targets for the other key workers as part of the more general rollout in due course.
Okay, let's concentrate on the TIC just for a moment. Once again, the Telford International Centre, and Councillor Davies, I guess from the council's side of helping make this happen, we've had some messages that have come through on social media from people who volunteered their services for, in one case, marshalling the car park, in another case, a volunteer vaccinator, and they're saying one of two things: either they've had their offer acknowledged, but then they've not had any follow-up message to say when to turn up, what to do, and things like that, or they've not had any response at all. So how do they best chase that up?
Right. So, firstly, there is a number of ways in which people can volunteer. So just bear with me one moment, just while I canter through them. So if you've applied to volunteer to the national gateway systems, the national volunteering system, that is a national system that we don't have any control over, and you will be contacted in due course. I do also know that a few weeks ago, locally, the NHS, and probably Dave will be able to speak a little bit more on this, we're also recruiting volunteers. And then as part of the council's effort to try and speed up the vaccination programme here in Telford Wrekin, we launched a volunteer recruitment campaign too. In regards to that one, clearly we are in control of that. The team have got a huge amount of applicants. We are working through them. Just because you haven't heard from us does not mean we're not interested. We will get back to you. We will acknowledge you, and we will let you know how you can help. Just incidentally, Chris, as an update from today, people may have seen that we were looking to recruit to our rapid testing facilities. We're opening a new one in Newport, and we're opening a new one in Madeley to complement the one in Oaken Gates. We had over 300 applicants for those roles within the space of 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours. So we've closed that opportunity. But the good news is, and I should just pause to say thank you so much to all of our residents who are volunteering or applying for roles to help the vaccination programme. But does take a little bit of time for our teams to go through all those applications to ensure that they can be assessed and then deployed.
The enthusiasm for taking part in this is noticeable, isn't it? I mean, I was at the TIC on yesterday, wasn't it? Monday, for the opening day of health and social care staff getting vaccinated, and the vibe there was incredible. There was just such a positivity around it. Everybody was just so happy to be there, whether they were just showing people where to go, helping with the queues, administering the vaccine, or receiving them. Everybody was just really chuffed.
And this is what makes our area, our community, a really great place to live and work, because actually when we come together and work as partners, we are much stronger. A much stronger service for our residents. And listen, the vaccination of our population is the only way out of this pandemic. It's the only way that we can start to go back to the pub or to restaurants or get our kids back to school safely, or be able to hug our neighbours or our friends. So we do need this to work. We want this to work. And everybody I speak to in Telford Wrekin who wants to be a part of this isn't complaining to me saying they don't want to, they can't be bothered with it all. What they're saying is go faster, go quicker. How can I help to get involved? And it's actually, and I haven't plugged them yet, and I will do at this point. There's been some brilliant Telford businesses that are coming forward and releasing their staff on day release to help this program, and that's just a fantastic endorsement of our community here in Telford Wrekin, both our resident community and our business community.
And in making things easier for those visiting, we'll turn to some questions in relation to those who have mobility problems. We have had some questions from those who they've seen the pictures at Woodside, they've seen the queuing up outside to try to get in, and of course it's cold. What's the deal for people who can't stand for any length of time? Is there any wheelchair assistance, access? What help is there available for them?
So I'll pick that up first. Shaun may want to add something. It's certainly much easier for us to be able to offer that level of assistance in somewhere like the International Centre than in some of the smaller sites. So anyone who's in that situation, I would suggest they book into the International Centre. If they make it clear, then we can try and make sure that we cope with their and helping them with their mobility problems. I am clear that we want to try and keep queuing down to an absolute minimum, because one, it's hugely inconvenient for people, and two, clearly we want to try and keep as few people in buildings as we possibly can at the moment. So we are trying to make sure that we get the queues right so that people don't have to wait for long periods of time. I think that again is easier to do in some settings than other, but we are getting there, and I would ask people to just give us a little bit of time to get the queues right. We will get there. It's inevitable, some of the teething problems that you encounter when you first start up, particularly with a centre as large as the International Centre. But given the huge efforts from the local authority in terms of marshals and volunteers, we can make arrangements for individuals with mobility problems. The other thing I'd add, though, Chris, is where we have got people who are housebound, and we do have some of our population who unfortunately are housebound for a variety of reasons, we will be starting the vaccinations for those again in the next couple of days, so that we begin to get those people vaccinated as well.
Oh, let's just stick with that. Will they be home visits?
Yes, they will.
And how would people go about booking specifically a home visit?
Again, it should be through the booking centre itself. And the booking system that enables you to do that. The part of the reason we haven't been able to do that until fairly recently is there was guidance around the AstraZeneca vaccine, because that's the only one you can do it with, and that has changed over the past few days. As more is known about these vaccines, inevitably that's the case. That does now allow us to move a vial of vaccine from one house to another location, which previously we weren't able to do.
So when you get to that particular point and you would go to book, then a home visit will be something that you can then select alongside Telford International Centre, Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol, whatever else, Woodside Pharmacy, yeah?
I believe that is the case, Chris, yes.
Shaun, I think you wanted to come in.
Can I just say about queuing? And listen, I don't mean to at all blame anyone, because I would be exactly the same, which is when you get your appointment, just pop along about 2 or 3 minutes beforehand, not sort of 10 or 15 or 20 or 25 minutes beforehand, because what happens is that's where the queue starts up. And I would be, listen, I would be there 24 hours beforehand just to make sure that I don't miss my spot. But just to say, if you are in a really fortunate position that you've been asked to go get your vaccine, just pop in sort of 5 minutes before is fine. The TIC clears a lot more space. You'll be managed in the car park, so you'll stay in your car for quite a while before you cool down. But in smaller facilities in Woodside, and as the other smaller facilities come on board, the queuing thing will be an issue. But if we all just get there sort of 2 or 3 minutes beforehand, that will help everybody.
What happens if somebody is a little bit late? Anything can happen. We had some dodgy weather yesterday to contend with as well. So if they turn up late, are they still okay?
I think it would depend on the circumstances at the time, Chris, but if for whatever reason they were late, we would make sure, if we couldn't vaccinate them, and we would make every effort to try and vaccinate them, then we would make sure that we rebooked. I think it depends on the period. If it's kind of a couple of hours late, that's more problematic. If it's 5 or 10 minutes late, we would try to make sure that we vaccinated them and gave them another slot there and then.
Just returning to the question that started off this sequence of the conversation, and just finishing off the wheelchair access question. If you request and need that assistance, how can you register that? How can you make that point when you make the booking? What facility is there so that you can say so?
So it may not always be able to do that one, particularly with the booking, but what I would suggest people do is book for the International Centre. They tell the marshals and the car park staff when they turn up that they have got a mobility problem, and we will then make the arrangements for that person to be helped and assisted through the TIC.
So more specifically, a question asking, will there be somebody at the TIC who can help this person get their wheelchair in and out of the car boot before and after the visit?
Yes, and also what we've got at the TIC, and Chris, and we certainly were working towards this last time I checked with the team. I'm pretty 99% certain we sorted it. Is there are some buggies, like golf buggies and other facilities that residents can use, and all they need to do is, once they get the TIC, just let the person know, the first person they know, that there's some mobility issues, and they'll sort it out. Listen, every bit of the design process in these facilities, particularly the TIC, because it's a much larger site, has been thought through from the perspective of somebody in their 80s. So the team should be able to cope with your individual needs. But if not, just ask anybody who's there. They're all there to help you, and they all want you to get there and get in and get out as quickly and as safely as you can for your vaccine. So just let the people know what support you need, and they will do their best to help you.
Somebody is asking, will there be drive-through vaccination centres in the future?
I think that will very much depend on what the experience of vaccination is over the next few months. I mean, certainly, we know we do flu drive-through vaccination centres, but at the moment, for Pfizer and for AstraZeneca, we do want to keep an eye on people for a few minutes after they've had the vaccine. So that makes a drive-through much more logistically difficult, if not impossible. However, I would imagine as we get into late spring, early summer, where we better understand any side effects that people are going to have after they've been vaccinated. And I have to say, we've seen very few nationally. There are very, very few. I would want to reassure people about that. And I see Lizzie's nodding to confirm that. We have seen an incredibly low level of reactions immediately after vaccine. But the NHS generally and locally is taking a very cautious approach to this. So we do want to observe people for about 10 to 15 minutes after they've had a vaccination before we let them go back to their car or with their relatives. I think that will change, but it won't probably be until spring or summer.
That takes me very nicely to a handful of questions on side effects. If you've had a reaction to the flu jab in the past, can you still be vaccinated against COVID?
Generally, yes. Liz may want to come in a second. The only time at the moment that we are advising people not to have one of the vaccines is around the Pfizer vaccine, and that is if they've had some episode of anaphylaxis following either medication or in relation to something else. But generally, just because you've had a reaction to one of the to a flu vaccine in the past, that would not preclude you from having the current vaccine. And the most common side effect by far that's been reported so far is a sore arm after the Pfizer vaccine.
Anything to add there, Liz? You were gesticulating while David was speaking.
No, nothing further to add. I mean, any queries, I suggest people do speak to their GP or their practice nurse if they've got specific issues they wanted to raise, but that's the standard way of doing that.
And to the person who said they've had flu-like symptoms since they had since November, then the advice there to the person asking that question is to go and speak to your GP. Sorry, David, I interrupted.
Sorry, Chris, I interrupted you. The other thing I was going to say was part of the process that you go through in terms of having the vaccination is going through a series of questions to identify whether you have had some kind of serious allergic reaction in the past, to make sure that we're clear about what we're trying to do in terms of consenting people.
When will shielders be able to go out again after having the vaccine? Do they have to wait until they've had both jabs?
That's a really interesting question, actually, and I might look to Liz to help me out on this one. I mean, certainly the reason why we've extended the period between first and second vaccine is because of the overall public health benefit of trying to vaccinate as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. So the data, as I understand it, from first doses of both AstraZeneca and Pfizer, is we don't think there is a significant drop-off in efficacy because you extend the period between the first and the second dose. But I'm not... what would my advice be on someone that was shielding? I'd probably advise them to wait until second dose.
I mean, in a sense, I think we will wait for national guidance around those that are formally shielding. There will be national guidance around that specific group. But I suppose that gives me also the opportunity to say, for those that have been immunised, it's fantastic, isn't it? And it's rolling out in the borough, and we're all really pleased about that. But at this point in time, we still need to follow all the precautions that we are doing in terms of staying at home, hands, face and space. It takes a number of weeks for those that are immunised to build up their immunity even after the first dose. And so, and I think there is a concern, and I do have a concern, that people start to relax too quickly when infection rates are still worryingly high within the borough. So it is important, it's great news, but it's important that we still follow the public health guidance around restrictions and hands, face and space.
Can I just add on that point, because I think this is really important for residents, because I think there is absolutely some hope, and there's hope in terms of the vaccine. But what we know is the vaccine reduces the risks of hospitalisation, serious illness, and death, which is really good news. But what we don't know yet, and the experts are looking at this all of the time, is does it stop you from actually carrying COVID-19, and does it stop you from spreading COVID-19? So, say for example, you are somebody in their 70s, and your dad's in their 90s. Your dad has the vaccine, which is good news for your dad. However, there's no evidence at the moment to say that he wouldn't have it, be infected by it, and then pass it on to you in your 70s. And if you have not had your vaccine, clearly that's going to be bad news for you. So that's why even after you're vaccinated, it is really important that the social distancing rules are followed. Clearly, we will get to a point as a country, and this is why it's really important we crack on with this, that all of us, or the vast majority of us, have been vaccinated, and therefore you've got the ability of having that enhanced protection. But Liz, I don't know if you want to come back on that, but that's a key point that I don't think necessarily is getting across in the national messaging.
I think that's really well said, Shaun. And I think what I would also say, though, is the vaccination it's great, but what that will do is enable us as a community and as residents to live more comfortably with this virus. It's not going to go completely away, and we're going to get flare-ups from time to time and outbreaks and new variants. So, it is absolutely fantastic news, but it's allowing us to live more comfortably with the virus is how I would put it.
If you've recently contracted COVID, can you still have the vaccination after the isolation period has expired?
So in terms of if you've had COVID, you can't be vaccinated against COVID for 28 days after that initial case. So it takes 28 days.
Okay.
I think it's really important, the clarity of that question. So 28 days from what point? 28 days from the test point, or 28 days from the 14 days of isolation? I think a lot of people
start. I think it's from the start of symptoms, but we can clarify that, or the test date if you're asymptomatic.
Okay. We'll post something on the chat in this afterwards. We have a handful of a few different types of questions in relation to vaccinations, and then I think, unless we have any significant number of questions coming in, I think we're almost there. So we've rattled through these really well, really quickly, but it's still not too late to fire your questions through. We have got people monitoring the social media channels, and they're feeding those questions through to me to feed through to the panel. So we're still here, and we'll still carry on. What are you doing to ensure that no dose of vaccine is wasted?
Everything we possibly can, I have to say, and we have got incredibly low wastage rates across the whole of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, and within Telford and Wrekin. So, for example, if one of the centres is getting to the end of a clinic with no more people coming in, or even if they've had some no-shows, and believe it or not, we do get some no-shows in terms of appointments that people don't turn up, the first port of call would be to the centre staff themselves that are there. Could we vaccinate them, even though they may be outside one of the cohort groups? And I would accept that, but I would rather use up vaccine. We will try and call people in at short notice if we possibly can, be that frontline staff or be that someone else. But we will make sure that we use every possible dose of vaccine and don't waste any.
If there is a no-show without good reason, what would I guess the NHS policy be on the second chance? Do they get one?
Yeah, they would get one. I mean, clearly, I think we'd want to understand what happened. Is this someone who's changed their mind and doesn't want the vaccine? And do we want to have a discussion about their reasons why they wouldn't want to have the vaccine? Because there are always individuals who may, for their own reasons, choose not to. But we certainly wouldn't say you can't have the vaccine. That's not what this is about. We want to make sure, as an area, as a borough, as a region, as a nation, that we absolutely vaccinate the maximum number of people we possibly can in as short a time as we possibly can.
And the person asking the question about the efforts not to waste any vaccines is also asking, would there be data available on how many vaccines are being wasted, if any indeed are?
I haven't got the data to hand, but it is a handful. I do know that. I mean, this is really, we've delivered. From the data I saw this morning, I can't remember whether I said this earlier on, up until close of play last night, across the whole of Shropshire, Telford and Wrekin, we delivered about 37,500 doses. We will have wasted a very, very small fraction of that, and it tends to be because of some degree of human error in drawing up the vaccine, not because we had a spare dose and we couldn't vaccinate someone. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Okay, if somebody isn't registered with a GP, how would they get a vaccination? And I'll just, as a side issue, and knowing what I do know about the council's work on homeless people and rough sleepers, there's a lot of work going on to make sure that they are registered with a GP while they're in emergency accommodation, so that they do get a vaccine. But what if somebody isn't registered? Then what happens to them?
So clearly there are always occasions where someone's recently moved, for example. that they may not have re-registered with a GP in their area. Clearly, if they've not registered, that makes it more difficult for us to be able to send something out. However, what I would say is the national database is based on NHS number. So provided someone has got an NHS number, it doesn't necessarily mean they need to be registered with a GP. What it would mean, however, is they would probably have to come to the international centre or somewhere like Woodside Pharmacy, because clearly they couldn't be done in a general practice because they would be contacting their own patients.
Can I just add on this that because it has been a question that's been raised a number of times by a number of people to me directly, that it's really easy as well if you want to, because there's various reasons why people don't want to register with a GP practice, some very personal to them, but you can temporarily register with a GP practice just for this purpose, if that's what you want to do. And then to deregister. Clearly, you'd have to deregister after your second dose. Clearly, we'd encourage everyone to be register with the GP practice, but I am aware of some very personal stories as to why that isn't the case for everybody. So you can, if you want to, on a temporary basis, just contact a GP practice and say that you want to register with them on for a short period of time, and that's fine too.
Somebody is saying that their post has been held up because of the weather for about a week, and they've not had any post, let alone an NHS letter. But then they're also aware that some people have been booking vaccinations not having received an NHS letter. What's the deal there? Do they have to wait for the letter before they can book?
They may well be contacted this week by the GP surgery to have an appointment within their local GP surgery, and that would be by telephone rather than by letter, almost certainly, or possibly text. So no, they don't necessarily need to wait for a letter. It is possible that one has gone out, but it's equally possible that people will get more than one way to book an appointment, either through the GP surgery or through the national database.
Covering a bit of old ground, but specifics, there's a 95-year-old grandfather that hasn't received any communication, and the family very, very worried. What should they do?
So I would ask them in the first instance to contact their GP surgery, because it's more than likely that they will have a slot available at their GP surgery. And I wouldn't wish to categorise all 95-year-olds by any stretch of the imagination, but it may well be easier for them to get to their GP surgery than, for example, the international centre.
Chris, just for that resident, because again, there's been lots of case studies being sent to me to support. If you do that, if you do contact your GP practice and it still don't get no joy, then just contact us here at the council. Email me directly, Shaun, shaun.davies, DAVIES @telford.gov.uk, and I'll be more than happy to take that up with the CCG if that's helpful.
We talked about volunteering at the International Centre. Somebody volunteered to work there and left voicemail messages on the number given. There's been no call back. So they've tried making the contact. Who else could they possibly try?
Just email me on the same email address. But as I said earlier on in the call, in the meeting, that the team are working through a huge volume of volunteers. And again, it depends on who you've asked to volunteer with. If it's directly with the council, then contact me. But whoever you've contacted, contact me, and I'll raise it. But there are 3 different ways in which you can volunteer at the moment: nationally, the NHS regionally, and us as a council. So whichever one it is, just drop me an email with the details, and I'll pass it on to the relevant person.
We spoke earlier about the paid personal assistance getting a vaccination. I'm just going to read this email that's come through. How do we get a PA who's paid via the council direct payments a vaccine? Our insurance says they should be having them now, the same time as social care companies, but they can't find out any information and they can't seem to get through to anybody on any telephone number. So how do they get that vaccination? Liz is holding her hand up there.
So I understand that we have written to PAs, personal assistants, to organise them to book on to get immunisations. If they have not heard from us, which is presumably what the situation is here, I would recommend that they email into careworkervaccinations@telford.gov.uk, and we'll try and respond to that specific query.
That's Care Worker Vaccinations as one word.
At telford.gov.uk.
At telford.gov.uk. Will the housebound be vaccinated by pharmacists, as the flu jabs were, asks the questioner.
Probably not, because we've got a roving teams that are going to go around and do the vaccinations, and that's not because we don't think pharmacists can do it. They clearly can, although you do need to have a degree of training to take part in the vaccination programme. It is different to the flu jab.
So we're heading towards Thursday, the big day when the over 80s, then going down to the 70s, the wider public at the TIC. What are your thoughts as we head towards that second milestone, the first one being yesterday when it all started at the TIC in the first place?
So I know there's been a lot of concern locally, which I completely understand, about the relative slow pace we started in Telford and Wrekin. I think that the International Centre plus all of the GP surgeries coming online over the next couple of days is going to make a real difference to what people see. As I said earlier, you know, we were top in the region around the percentage of care home residents that we vaccinated. And actually, I think if we'd have been having this conversation 10 days ago and someone had said, where do you think you'll be? And I'd said, we're going to get to top of the list on the percentage care home residents, people would have said, no, you won't. So we have proved that we can deliver this. We are pulling out all the stops to deliver it. We know we are going to ramp up and considerably ramp up both this week and moving into next week. And I'm very, very confident that we will meet the targets for over 80s and cohorts 3 and 4 by the middle of February.
We are being asked repeatedly, not that you get a choice in the matter, by the way, but which vaccine is being given at the International Centre?
AstraZeneca.
It is the AstraZeneca. I think we did talk about Audley Court in Newport. This just come in. Have Audley Court in Newport begun calling people to book slots yet? As I say, I do recall a member of the public saying on Facebook that they had the invitation to do that. So from that, I'm guessing yes, but I'll put that to you.
I believe they are, but I would need to check to be absolutely crystal clear on that, Chris. And some of that will be through their GP surgeries, because we're using Audley Court in Newport for delivery of Pfizer. The 2 GP surgeries will potentially be doing AstraZeneca within the surgery, and therefore it will be partially through the booking centre and partially through GP surgeries.
So will the International Centre starting, I understand the daily capacity is going to be what, 1,080? So 1,080, add in all these other places. We've already mentioned Teldoc, Woodside already running, and the ones that we've listed that will be coming online, the ones in Wellington, Audley Court in Newport, Sturchley, Hollinswood, Prisley, Dorley, Charlton Medical Centre. Throw all that into the mix. How many thousands are we talking about a day?
So the GP surgeries is a bit harder to define, Chris, because obviously the GP surgeries do need to carry on doing what I would call routine primary care work. So whilst they are hugely committed to delivering the vaccine programme, they can't possibly deliver the vaccine programme 12 hours a day, 7 days a week in the same way that we're able to do at the International Centre. So we will be looking at giving as much capacity as we possibly can. It is slightly dependent on vaccine supply still, although we do know what we're going to get over the next couple of weeks now. I think we will be looking at potentially vaccinating 12 to 1,500 people a day, but that may not be every day. It will certainly be 1,000 plus. Teldoc will continue in what they've been vaccinating. The other surgeries coming online do give us more capacity, but that capacity will vary day by day depending on which surgeries are able to offer a clinic at any point.
And Shaun, as we head for Thursday then, and the public coming into the TIC, the wider public, what are your thoughts as we head there?
Well, I want to say a huge thank you to all of our NHS colleagues, our GP practices, our volunteers, our local government officers. This is all systems go, and we're effectively going to flip this week the position compared to last week. There was a huge amount of demand, not much supply. This week and towards the end of this week, we're going to go to lots and lots of supply. So that's really good news. Get your vaccine when you're called up. The Telford International Centre has the capacity to eventually go to something in the region of 10,000 vaccinations a day, I'm told, and that's where we need to be a real aspiration to get to that number as quickly as we can. We absolutely want to be the best performing area in the West Midlands and the best performing area in the country. And I won't apologise to anybody for setting that challenge and that standard, because, in my opinion, our Telford Wrekin residents deserve that. I don't want to see us at the bottom of any league table. I want to be at the top of the league table and always pushing on and beating other areas, because that's ultimately what you deserve as residents. So I'll keep on banging the drum. If people don't like that, that's fine, but I will keep on banging the drum. As you've heard from Dave Evans today, doing well now in terms of our care home settings, doing well in terms of our over 80s, more progress towards the end of this week, getting into the 70s. And wouldn't it be brilliant if we were one of the first areas to vaccinate all of our over 70s, vaccinate all of some of our key workers once they're defined, and that's the challenge that we want to do. And my real plea is, let's work together. Let's not have these. It's not necessarily locally, but nationally. Let's not have this divide between the health system and the local government system, the private sector and the public sector. Let's all work to get this national mission accomplished, because we all need that to happen, so we can get back to a new way of living, where, as I say, we can go to the pubs, the restaurants, go back to work, get our kids back to school, and hug our neighbours.
Liz Noakes, Director of Public Health. So
I would just appeal to everybody, when they're offered an immunisation, to take it up. This is the route out. It is really important that everyone takes up the offer. It is safe. We should be taking this offer up as the NHS roll it out, and as we hear increasingly so over the next few weeks. But still, I do need to urge people to continue to follow the public health guidance around social distancing, staying at home, hands, face and space, because we still are living with this virus, and the immunisation programme is fantastic and will help us to, as I say, live more comfortably with the virus.
One day, hopefully it'll be sooner rather than later. Stay safe, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.